Okay, we will be talking about the Gestalt language processing, and it's Sarah Gardner, me, Tiana Clark, Abby Hawkinsmith, and Courtney Hackworth. Our agenda today is we will first talk about the overview, then the historical and theoretical aspects, training and treatment, review of research, and then the strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, and to start, this slide includes a short video that introduces the concept of Gestalt language processing. So as you watch, think about how language might develop differently for some children, especially those who may not learn language word by word, but instead in larger chunks or phrases.
What is Gestalt language processing? Did you know that there are two ways to develop language? There are analytical language processors and Gestalt language processors. People can be one or the other or both. Analytical language processors often start by babbling, then they use single words. Next, they combine words, and finally, they start to use sentences and grammar correctly. Understanding echolalia is key to understanding Gestalt language processing. Echolalia is the repetition of utterances or phrases. These may be phrases or words that the child has heard people say around them or that they've heard from the media. Gestalt language processors often begin by using echolalia or chunks of language. Later, they break these chunks into smaller chunks, and later still into one or two word combinations. Eventually, these are developed into contextually appropriate sentences. This language often isn't literal. For example, a child who says, let's go to school, may really mean simply, let's go. The echoed phrase may also be rich in intonation and emotion. For example, a child may repeat phrases they've heard from a story. So the phrase, oh no, a bear, may go on to be used by the child whenever they feel scared. There are lots of ways to support Gestalt language processors. Remember that the child may often use these phrases for communication. Take notes of the phrases your child uses. Consider the situation and try to figure out the meaning. Model phrases for your child. Check out buildingblocks.org.
Okay, and to understand Gestalt language processing, it helps to look at how the idea developed over time. So in the 1970s, Ann Peters was one of the first researchers to notice that some children learn language in chunks rather than single words. This was a really important shift in thinking about language development. In the 1980s, Barry Present studied echolalia in individuals with autism. He found that echolalia isn't just repetitive or meaningless, it actually serves a communicative purpose. And more recently, in the 2012, Marge Blanc built on this work and developed the Natural Language Acquisition, or the NLA protocol. She expanded the model into stages and created a framework that clinicians still use today. And that can be seen in this photo on the slide. So moving into the theoretical side of things, Gestalt language development is considered a natural and valid way of language learning. Not everyone learns language word by word. Some individuals learn language through meaningful chunks or what we call gestalts. A big takeaway here is that echolalia is meaningful. It can serve different purposes like communication, emotional expression, or even self-regulation. So instead of trying to eliminate it, we should understand and support it. Another important idea is that language is tied to experiences, things like context, emotions, and interactions. That's what helps it stick. Overall, development follows a progression from whole chunks of language to breaking those chunks down and eventually to more flexible, self-generated language. So even though the pathway looks different, the end goal is the same. This slide focuses more on how this looks in practice. Individuals with ASD who are Gestalt language processors tend to start with larger memorized chunks of language. Over time, these chunks are gradually broken down and recombined into more flexible language. Learning happens in natural environments rather than through drill-based approaches. It's also very child-directed, meaning the child initiates communication using their stored language, while adults support and model meaningful language in response. Finally, this approach really emphasizes pragmatics, so things like communication intent, social function, and context, rather than just focusing on correct grammar or structure. So now we're getting into what treatment really looks like with Gestalt language processing. One of the main components is modeling meaningful gestalts. So instead of focusing on single words, clinicians model full phrases that are functional and relevant to the child's experiences. Another key piece is responsive interaction. That means when a child uses echolalia, we respond to it as communication rather than just trying to correct it or stop it. We also support something called mitigation, which is when those larger language chunks start to get broken down and recombined to more flexible language over time. There's also a strong pragmatic focus, meaning we care more about what the child is trying to communicate, like requesting, commenting, or connecting, rather than just how correct the sentence is. And finally, everything happens in naturalistic contexts like play or daily routines, so that the language is meaningful and more likely to carry over into real life. So, before clinicians can effectively support Gestalt language processors, it's important that they receive proper training in this approach. Training in supporting Gestalt language development is typically provided through professional education and continuing education opportunities. Instruction focuses on a few key areas: identifying Gestalt language processors, understanding the stages of natural language acquisition, or the NLA, and using stage appropriate language modeling and therapy. This type of training is specifically intended for speech language pathologists who plan to apply the NLA framework in clinical practice. It ensures that clinicians are not only familiar with the theory, but also confident in implementing strategies that align with how these individuals naturally develop language.
So now I'm going to talk about my slide. So now we're going to talk about who implements the treatment, and it's primarily the speech language pathologist. They use natural language acquisition framework during both assessment and intervention to support the gestalt language development. However, SLPs are not the only ones using this treatment approach. Caregivers and families play an important role, and they're coached by the SLP to use these strategies every single day in their routines. This helps reinforce language in their natural context. There's other team members as well, such as educators, AAC specialists, and other related professionals. The main goal here is to help generalize these skills in more than one context rather than just in the therapy room. So, in the classroom, the home, anywhere else this child would be. So,